Welcome back to Archives Live. I'm Samantha Mackey, and I'm here with David Peters, head of the OSU Archives. David, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Welcome back to Stillwater, Samantha.
Thank you. So thank you all for joining us today. Today, we're talking about all of the things that have made OSU what it is today. So David, we're sitting here in the library today. Can you tell us a little bit about how the location for the library was chosen and then how the library became such a central hub on campus?
So, golly, a long time ago, when President Bennett arrived in the late 20s, but by 1930, he had a plan to dramatically change campus. And we're going to talk more about that later. But in that plan was the location of a library at he considered the new center of campus, where we are right now at the Edmonds Library. The old center of campus was at Old Central, and so it was a much smaller quadrangle. The academic facilities were all around that little area. He had a much larger vision, and so this move to where we are now at the time was considered kind of radical, but he wanted to place the library at the academic center of campus. And this spot here was the site that they selected. That was in 1930. Now, of course, the library isn't built until 20 years later, and they had to change the design and things. But he wanted it here. A lot of things came in between 1930 and 1953 when it was built that came out from this building: life sciences, engineering south, classroom building. Whitehurst was already there, but this quadrangle here then was centered on the library. And so it was a fairly significant change at the time. But it was, for Bennett, it was the heart of the academic institution. So that's how we got here. And I think we have a few pictures. Yeah. So here's the groundbreaking ceremony. This was in 1951. And so this is the site where we are now. So they had quite a ceremony for that. A lot of people were there. Here's an early picture looking from what we know as University Avenue now, but then it was College Avenue, looking north towards the library under construction. So the Student Union had just been completed. It's on the right-hand side, and then the library is pictured in the back, and you can see the kind of the outline of the steel for the steeple going up. I think we have one more. This is a picture taken from roughly where the business building is, the New Spears School building. But at the center is the old power plant chimney from the power plant. But you can see the library going up as the main feature. And then on the far left is the human sciences going up. And so, but this is kind of early construction for the library. And so a lot of older facilities were torn down to make room, but there was nothing at this particular location. And it took them over 3 years to complete the facility, so it wasn't completed until 1953. So
great. Okay. Well, so when OSU's name changed from OAMC to OSU, why did that happen?
So we have to remember most of the A&M, in fact, I think all of the A&M colleges, and there was Texas A&M still exists, but like Kansas State was Kansas A&M, Iowa State was Iowa A&M, Oklahoma State was Oklahoma A&M. Well, all of those were established under the Morrill Act, or the Land Grant College Act, and that act was approved in 1862. So now we're roughly almost 100 years later. College curriculum have changed. They're not just focusing on agricultural curricula and mechanical arts or engineering. They've expanded the kinds of courses that they offer at these colleges. And so it was felt by the mid-50s that we really need to expand our branding, and that's what kind of the title change was all about, was expanding our brand, because you have arts and sciences and business, and so you have all these other entities on campus. And so what happened in 1957, it took an act of the state legislature first. They had to allow for a name change. The governor signs off on that in May of '57. Then the Board of Regents, which is still our Board of Regents for Agricultural and Mechanical Colleges, they convene in June. They approve the name change then, and so it actually takes place then in July of 1957. For students who had started school here before the name change, up until about 1959, 1960, they could have their diploma when they graduated either be from OAMC or OSU. They had that option, and so there were many who started under OAMC, and that's how they wanted their diploma to be listed as Oklahoma Agricultural Mechanical College. But so our name has changed to Oklahoma State University, but it's Oklahoma State University of Agriculture and Applied Sciences. Most people don't realize that was the official name change. That name lasted until 1980, and then in 1980 they dropped the Agriculture and Applied Sciences. At that point, we became Oklahoma State University.
Great. So we have a comment from Bonnie, and she said she wonders if those shovels were orange, like at the groundbreaking ceremonies we have now.
I don't know. The only pictures we have of the event are, of course, black and white.
Mm-hmm.
They may have been, but I don't know. But excellent question. I'm not sure how we can resolve that unless we can find. There might be a description from the newspaper or something.
Maybe, yeah.
Describing the orange shovels that were used.
Yeah.
So.
Well, if you are just now joining us, this is Archives Live, and I'm here with David Peters. And this month we are talking about how OSU became the university it is today. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave them below the live stream, and we will read them out on air today. So, David, in your opinion, what are some of the defining moments in OSU's history that have kind of shaped the university?
So the key part of that question is my opinion, because there are thousands of points of time and events and activities and people that have had an impact on this institution. So these are just some of my favorites, I guess, or what I think are significant ones. The first one I'd like to talk about, that's the OAMC, as we talked about the change from OAMC to OSU. And here are some of the symbols reflecting that change over time. But the first event, and I'm kind of doing these in chronological order, that I'd like to talk about is the establishment of the Magruder Plots. The Magruder Plots are the longest existing field trials west of the Mississippi River, I believe. I think that's how they stated. But they were started in 1892. The reason I select that, first of all, it's since 1892, so right after the college was started. But it shows our persistence and dedication, especially in research. And so we're a very patient place. And even when those fields needed to be moved to another location, they did that and were able to continue the wheat trials. But I think it's significant in that it just shows the stability of Oklahoma State University and our commitment to success. Another event that I've selected was the completion of Old Central. So Old Central is completed in 1894. Until that point, all of our facilities on campus were wood frame structures. Even classrooms initially were held off campus. And so the establishment of that building, of Old Central, really fixes the site of Stillwater as the site for the Oklahoma Agricultural Mechanical College. It was also a participation from the citizens of Stillwater, who provided funding for that in part, and the territorial legislature. And so it really symbolizes to me the impact the college had on Stillwater, that Stillwater had on the college, and that kind of final anchor establishing the college here. Ultimately, it's not the final anchor, but at least it's a strong anchor for establishing the college here. Then my next kind of as a person, Angelo C. Scott was president here beginning in 1899, so it's still the territorial period. He's president for about 9 or 10 years. He lasted until the beginning of the state era. The reason I picked Angelo Scott is he was the first president really to establish any kind of stability. So just like Old Central kind of creates some stability for facilities on campus, Scott is the first one as an administrator to establish some consistency over a period of time. Before Scott arrived, in the previous 8 years, we had 4 presidents. So there's a pretty high turnover. And so Scott's arrival really also kind of, to me, emphasizes a period of stability and establishment. And he was quite a gentleman. He really believed in the whole educational experience. He felt that students need to be exposed to as many types of coursework as possible. They need to be kind of Renaissance people. They needed to have physical activity and mental activity and emotional and spiritual support. And so he really saw the student as a whole being and not just someone to learn facts or something. So Angelo C. Scott is my next choice. Then in 1914, excuse me, we had 2 very significant fires. Morrill Hall, which was our main administration building, was gutted by fire. All that was left was the exterior walls. And so it's where the president's offices were. It's where a number of classrooms, laboratories were. It was our main administrative building, and it's destroyed in August of 1914. Within 3 months later, what is now the Bartlett Center for the Studio Arts was the Women's Residence Hall and the Domestic Science Building or Human Sciences also had a fire in the top 2 floors, and it's where the women on campus lived, and so they lost their housing. It's where that whole school at the time of home economics housed all of their classrooms and everything. And so those two back-to-back fires really threatened the existence of the college here. There were efforts underway elsewhere in the state to move the college someplace else rather than try to rebuild those two facilities. And so these two fires here really, to me, also kind of demonstrate a perseverance, overcoming a struggle, a challenge. And so this first picture, this is the top floor of domestic science, Gardner on fire. And in the background on the right-hand side, you can see the gutted Morrill Hall without a roof there. And here's Morrill Hall gutted completely. Here's an interior shot of the president's office. I mean, there was just nothing left. It's part of the reason why we have very few records in the archives from the first 25 years of the college. Most of them were lost in that fire. And so to me, that's also a significant event. So now I mentioned him earlier and the presidency of Henry Bennett. So Bennett arrives here in 1928. He really has a vision for the college to grow into a university. And so it's a matter of scale with Bennett. Bennett changes the scale for everything. And so he comes up with this master plan, dramatic development of facilities, increased activity on campus for providing classes and research. And he's a master at this. He's building relationships with political leaders in the state, with national political leaders, with business leaders, donors. And so Bennett era, which really lasted a little bit after his death. He passed in '51 in a plane crash. But it's just the sheer magnitude of the scale and the planning and the teamwork that he brought to campus. And he to this day was our longest serving president. So anyway, Bennett is another one of the kind of moments. It's not really a moment, but impacts for the campus. I'm sorry, we're back to the pictures. So here's another picture of the domestic science building under fire. And there's the crowds gathered. It was a homecoming weekend when that building lost. And here's a picture of Henry G. Bennett, really just a remarkable gentleman. And OSU has benefited from his time here. And then I've got two folks that I've picked kind of, once again, we're talking about scale. Edward Gallagher, who was athletic director and wrestling coach. He also coached, if he needed to, tennis and baseball and football and track, but he's most known for wrestling. And then eventually, Mr. Gallagher brought in Henry Iba. And the reason I've selected these two gentlemen is they were the ones who brought our first national championships. So Gallagher's wrestling teams are competing in the 1920s and bringing home the national championships. They're touring all over the country. Other parts of the United States are now being exposed to Oklahoma State University, Oklahoma A&M at the time, and Iba does the same thing with basketball. We have back-to-back NCAA titles in '45 and '46, and so it's a matter of scale. Once again, now we're reaching a much larger audience, a national audience, when we're bringing in national championships, and so that's why I kind of selected those two gentlemen to represent the athletic improvement, and really I think it starts with Gallagher and Iba. And then let's see what else. And then another one, and this is maybe kind of unusual too, but the GI Bill has a tremendous impact on our student population. Right after World War II, our enrollment had declined during the war, and then of course there's a dramatic increase after the war as these students, many of whom had served their country, are now under the GI Bill, have the opportunity to go to college. And for many of them, it was the first time anyone in their families had a chance to go to college. And very quickly, our enrollments go from 3,000 and 4,000 to 12,000 and 15,000. And so it's a dramatic change in the number of students we're serving, the needs of the campus to provide facilities, both teaching facilities, research facilities, housing facilities. The picture I've got selected here is the old vet village from Veterans Village. It was really kind of a community unto itself. They had their own newspaper and their own government, but it reflects this dramatic change in the size of the campus because of this huge enrollment increase. It also there's significant change in the demographics. Now it's not just 18-year-old young people coming, from rural Oklahoma, having graduated from high school. These are people who have had life experience, and many of them are bringing spouses and children with them. And so their expectations for a college education and the college experience is much different than an 18-year-old would have been. And so we begin looking at changes to the kinds of social structures we create and the social support systems that we create. And so there, once again, it's a matter of scale and change in campus. And then the last one I selected is Mr. Boone Pickens, T. Boone Pickens. He's had a tremendous impact both in academics but in athletics. Most often we know about the athletic part of it, but in academics he's changed the whole the support structure for endowed professorships. And so his involvement has dramatically increased participation in the institution. And so to me, I think he reflects once again a dramatic change in scale and the impact that has had on our campus in athletics and in academics. And so, like I said, this is just a small sampling, because for every individual or topic I've mentioned, there are 100 more that could have been discussed, but we have limited time. So I try to move through it as quickly as I could. But those are some of the things I think about when I think about impacts on campus.
So you mentioned a bunch of changes, and one of these changes was our mascot. How did OSU become the Cowboys?
So we had been the Tigers. Beginning about 1900, we adopted the Tigers in part because one of our family members' parents, his father, had gone to Princeton University, and Princeton was the Tigers, and they were orange and black, and so we just kind of adopted. I think we consider ourselves the Princeton of the Prairie, and so we adopted the orange and black colors and the Tigers as our mascot. By 1924, in fact, the fall of 1924, we are considering, or we do join the Missouri Valley Conference. Well, the Missouri Valley Conference already has a team, University of Missouri, that has a tiger as a mascot. We've begun exploring other alternatives for a mascot before that. So beginning in the early 20s, people began throwing out the term cowpokes, pokes, cowboys, terms more with a Western flair, in part because Gallagher is now taking his wrestlers all across the country, and invariably they're showing up at these places wearing cowboy boots and cowboy hats, because that's where they came from. And so it was actually a lot of sports writers in these other locations that referred to the Cowboys coming to town. That was picked up by sports writers in Oklahoma City and Tulsa markets, and so they began referring to some of our teams as Cowboys. And so by 1924, then, when we joined the Missouri Valley, there's really a strong emphasis to change to the Cowboys. And what kind of topped it all off in the late fall of 23, Armistice Day, which would have been in November of 1923, an old cowboy named Frank Eaton from Perkins, Oklahoma, is in the parade. He's riding one of the floats, or maybe he's riding on his horse, but he's in the parade. And there were students at the time who said, this guy is just the perfect symbol of a cowboy. And that really was kind of the nudge that kind of pushed us into being referred to the Cowboys. By 1925-26, Gallagher, who is athletic director, begins producing stuff that's distributed at football games and basketball games, like balloons that say "Ride 'em Cowboys," that kind of stuff. And so by the mid-20s, we've now converted to being the Cowboys.
Great. Well, so David, what are the origins of Orange Friday?
So I'm not exactly sure, but it's only about 35 years ago that we began trying to, first of all, support in the fall home football games. And so on Fridays, people were encouraged to wear orange. And we started that. We have new freshmen coming in, so we wanted to indoctrinate them early into wearing orange. And so, for the best of my recollection, by the mid '80s, we're beginning to encourage this wearing of the colors or orange on Friday. I don't remember any kind of formal like adoption of this, but I think it was strong support for the athletic department and especially the football team in the fall and getting people into the spirit of orange and black in our colors. So I don't have a definitive answer, but my guess is by the mid 80s, we're beginning to start that process of Orange Fridays, and that momentum has continued to grow. And so now it's kind of assumed that's what we've always done, and we hopefully will continue doing it for many years ahead.
So you've mentioned a few of them before, but who are some notable alumni of OSU, and how has their impact on campus been felt?
So this, once again, so there are hundreds of people who have been a part of this institution as students, whether they graduated or not, but we consider them alums. They've been students here. So I've just picked a few, just a few that I think are significant. Some people will recognize these names, and some maybe they won't. But in fact, I had to make a list because I know I'm leaving out a whole bunch anyway. But some people that I think have been impactful in the nation, and not just on our campus, like Anita Hill, who was in government service for a number of years, and I think is on the faculty at Brandeis University now. So Anita Hill, Hoyt Axton, a singer-songwriter. For those of us who remember Three Dog Night, they sang several of Hoyt's songs, but he was attended here for a while. There's another gentleman named Garth Brooks that some people may have heard of, but he attended Oklahoma State University. A personal favorite of mine is Greg Jennings, a bachelor guitar player who was here in the 70s. He's been in Nashville with Restless Heart for over 35 years, and so just a remarkable young man who's my age. Then I've got Tim Dubois, who actually went to Nashville at the same time as Greg Jennings, who's been a music executive for a number of years now. Jay Daniel, who was a TV producer. I think we've got a picture here. Oh, now we got the Tigers. We got the switch over from the Tigers to the Cowboys. So here's some early images of the Tigers, and there's Frank Eaton. And there's Pistol Pete, which is our top cowboy, I guess. How do we get here? Oh, significant people. So Chester Gould, who was a cartoonist and did Dick Tracy. It's probably his most popular cartoon. Rex Lynn is an actor at CSI for a number of years. James Marsden, more recent actor that most people are familiar with. Paul Miller, who was president of the Associated Press for a number of years, and CEO and chairman of Gannett Corporation for a long time. Went to school here and got a journalism degree. I mentioned Boone Pickens already as a graduate of this institution. Bud Saratine, we have two facilities named after Mr. Saratine, who was active in business and industry and also with professional sports. And then we have, I guess, other political leaders. Henry Bellman, former senator and governor from the state of Oklahoma. In fact, do we have? Well, there's well. Let me. I'm creating havoc here. So here's Chester Gould with Dick Tracy, and there's Henry Bellman, senator and governor, and there have been others. Senator Tom Coburn went to school here. Senator Don Nichols went to school here. Wes Watkins, U.S. House of Representatives, went to school here. Our current governor, Kevin Stitt, and our previous governor, Mary Fallon, were from here. But other people might not recognize Walter Kluwer. Walter Kluwer went to the state of Washington and really was the father of the wine industry. It's a $1 billion industry, and maybe not billion, but it's a multi-million-dollar industry in the state of Washington. And he is the one who inspired grapes to be grown in Washington. William Pogue and Stuart Rosa are astronauts, or were astronauts. I'm just going to mention one athlete because there are. Once again, we could spend a whole session just on athletes. But Barry Sanders, and there it's just he's our only Heisman Trophy winner, remarkable athlete and student from Oklahoma State University. We've had people that went on to be brigadier generals, major generals in the military. Prime Minister of South Korea was Nam Duck-woo. Presidents of other colleges and universities, governors and senators for other states. So they went here, but then they went back to another state and were elected to office there. CEOs of major corporations. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so once again, I've just picked a few. There's a picture of Paul Miller, and I don't think we have anybody else. So that's it. But we've had a lot of graduates from this institution who have gone on, and even those who didn't graduate, who attended here for a while, gone on and have had wonderful impact, both on our campus. I left off two. Oliver S. Woollum was a graduate. He was our president here after Bennett passed away. He was a president for over almost 15 years. And then our current president, Burns Hargis, was a graduate of Oklahoma State University and returned and had an impact on our college. And so there's a host of others, and I'm sure we'll get names of other people that they want to nominate. But with the limited time I had, those are some of the ones I picked that I think kind of reflect some of the political, business, entertainment, athletics that we've had from Oklahoma State University.
Well, we have a question from William, and he would like to know, how was our alma mater written?
There was a contest, I believe. I don't have the details on me, but I think it was either a graduate student but a student in music, and they had a contest, and I think that's how it was written. I could have that mixed up with Rydom Cowboys, but I'll have to check on that, William, and find out. We'll produce something in our Facebook, but there was a judging, and I think and it started, of course, when it was OAMC, so they had to adjust a little bit when it became OSU. But we'll find out the details on that. Good question.
And then we have another question from Krishela, and she would like to know, how did football traditions like the Paddle People and the Wave Song start?
So the Wave Song started in the 19-teens. My vague recollection of this story is that one of our faculty had been in New York City attending a Broadway show and heard the tune. I have terrible pitch, but you know how it goes. Yeah. Heard that tune, came back, and used it in a production at the Opera House, which is off of 9th Street and off of 9th and Main. It's where the Antique Mall is now. There was an opera house there, and there was a student production, and someplace in that production they had the football team doing this number, and they waved as they were doing it. Well, the audience waved back to them, and so I may have butchered this story completely, but my understanding is then they began doing that at football games. I mean, the players weren't out waving, but the fans would wave in acknowledgement of touchdowns or field goals. And so I'm pretty sure that's how that got started in the teens. The Paddle People, that is more recent. And I'm not sure of the details, because that's been within the last, 15, 20 years maybe. I don't know whether a couple of people showed up with paddles, but I know they have tryouts, and it's a hot demand to be a part of that group. I'm not sure how their paddles are made, and if there's a certain size or standard they have to use, and they have to get special permission to bring a paddle into the I don't know any of the details on that, but that's been a fairly recent addition. And I know there are certain limits on the number of things you can have. Like you can't have, like I think like bullet can only go so far on the field, and there's certain restrictions that the NCAA has, but they must somehow qualify to be a part of that. We'll try to find out more about the Paddle People too. I'm guessing sometime in the last 15 years, and I think it was probably just an ad hoc. A group of students got together, thought, hey, this would be neat, or saw something someplace else and began doing it, and it's caught on. So
great. So one last question before we go.
Okay.
What is your favorite fact about OSU that many people might not know?
Okay, so I narrowed it down to three favorite facts. There's a whole bunch, but I think these are kind of quirky or unique in a way. And so the first one is, when the campus was first established here, there's nothing out here, right? It's just the plains. And so when the crew went out to mark the corners of the college, they did that. There was 200 acres, and so they marked the corners of the university. And the closest corner to town was the southeast corner of campus. That was still a quarter mile from town, but that was the, and so the southeast corner of campus is located at, well, it's the Peck's Lodge, and so I have a picture of it here. But if you look at this picture, at the very center, at the bottom, right at the building, that's where the corner of campus is. So all the sidewalks on University on the south side of the street, and all the sidewalks on Knobloch on the east side of the street, and the streets themselves are a part of University property. One of the first things they did early on was to start building this road that was going to go all the way around campus. They never finished it, but they got at least the college part or University Avenue started, and they got Knobloch started, and then the sidewalks on both sides. And so that's why the corner is actually, we would think it would be like in the town of Stillwater, but that's corner is located right there at that location. Anyways, that's one of them. That's what I think is kind of quirky. Then the library, we talked about this earlier. When the library was first kind of imagined by President Bennett, he saw it as a square building with really 4 entrances, north, south, east, and west. So there wasn't really a front of the building. And it was going to be very much like the state capitol in Oklahoma City, where Lincoln Boulevard goes around it. So at the time, there was a major highway called Albert Pike Highway that went through Stillwater. So his vision was for Albert Pike Highway. So all these people traveling through Stillwater would travel through and go around the library. So they'd be coming into campus and around the library and then out again. When he envisioned this, in the 1930s, we had roughly 2,500, 3,000 students. By the time the library is built in 1953, by the time it's completed, we have 15,000 students. So it would have been a vehicular and pedestrian nightmare if they'd gone through with that plan. But originally, the library was going to be at kind of the center of what is now Life Sciences, Engineering South, Classroom Building, and Whitehurst, the center of those 4 buildings, with this major highway going around it. So that didn't happen. And then the last thing I think is kind of interesting. For many years, we celebrated the anniversary of the college as December 14th rather than December 25th or Christmas Eve. And part of the reason we did that is December 14th was the day classes first started in 1891. December 14th happened to also be Henry G. Bennett's birthday. And so for a number of years, especially once Bennett got here, we celebrated December 14th as the anniversary of the establishment of the college or birthday. And we did that really until the centennial celebrations that began in the 1980s. And they began looking at the establishment of the college. And we went with the earlier date that established both us, University of Central Oklahoma, and another school in Norman.
Great. Well, David, thank you for chatting with us today. And of course, thank you to our viewers for tuning in and joining in on the conversation in the comments. If you would like to see more photos and posts, you can check out our Facebook page. You can also check out our videos on OState TV and our YouTube. The websites will be linked at the end of the program. So thank you once again for tuning in, and we'll see you next month on Archives Live.